Hello. Are you in the room here, Alex? There you are.
Yeah. Hey.
Boy, that was a bunch of technical fun.
Yeah. Talk about a nightmare.
So anyhow, we had a whole bunch of technical problems. I would say that we had to troubleshoot about 100 things. Finally got everything working.
Yep, absolutely.
So now, of course, you kind of get thrown off base, and I'm like, oh my God, we had almost get right into Jim. We had Jim lined up, Jim Myers.
So here's the thing. We were obviously late, but it looks like I can go and add us and get us live again on all the other destinations.
So we're not live.
No, we are live on YouTube. I'm literally I just added us all back on all this. So anything after 10 minutes, they cut out the schedule, but I just re-put us up live. So we're live everywhere now.
I gotcha.
So sorry, guys. My computer was acting super messed up. We couldn't pin it down at first. I wanted to blame Doug, but it was me. So, but we're good to go. We're live everywhere. So please, everyone, bring in your comments. Looks like Deborah's already in. How's it going? We got Paul Wallis tonight. He's a best-selling author. And you've actually, I haven't talked to him yet, but you've had him on before,
right? Yep. I've met Paul, and we're already working on a project together. So he's just an amazing guy. He's one of a million people that you'd ever meet, with the intelligence and his education and his niceness and his interest in everything and open mind. He's an amazing guy.
That's awesome. So what did were you guys were we going to talk about something different than the last time you was on, or are we going to go more into depth?
Totally different. His new book, Echoes of Eden. Also, we were going to have Jim Myers on.
Yep, absolutely. We're going to have him on. That'll be great.
And Jim knows about we're really messing up this week big time. Does Jim have the link?
Jesus.
So he doesn't. Can we get it to him?
Absolutely.
All right. I'm gonna get you a trumpeter swan as a pet, Alex, and put him in your pond.
And
the killer swan.
The killer swan.
Yeah, the killer swan.
And what do they kill?
People.
People.
Yeah, they kill. Yeah, I'll get into that. So I've got all these. So my neighbor bought some ducks, right, which is cute, and they raised them and they let them go. The problem is they're breeding, but they're all tame, and these are wild mallard ducks. And so I have all these ducks on my beach pooping everywhere, and they picked my beach, not his beach. Right? They won't go on his beach. They go on my beach, and they cover it with duck fun. Anyhow, so I was looking up on Amazon, like, what can I get, and I'm thinking, and I've tried like the owl statues.
The owl statue.
And the ducks end up sleeping next to the owl statues. That doesn't work. I've tried the rubber snakes. It doesn't work. They end up with duck poop on top of the snakes. Tried the spinners, but they only last a few days because no matter how far you stick them in the ground, they take off. Then when you have a storm and they're gone, and they're like $20 for like 10 of them, and you got to put them together. Oh, such pain. So I'm thinking I'm going to get a trumpeter swan statue, put it on my beach, because they are the badass of the waterfalls. I mean, I've watched a trumpeter swan one time kill a Canadian goose in like seconds. It grabbed it by the neck and just thrashed it. And I'm like, oh my God, that's crazy. So I'm thinking about getting a trumpeter swan statue. And so I'm thinking, just kind of was curious, like how many of those are out there now, because I do see them once in a while. So anyhow, I looked up statues, and sure enough, they sell them for, getting rid of ducks. I'm like, perfect. I looked at the price. Oh, only $149. For one that isn't like 5 inches across, because you need them. They're like 30 inches long. I mean, they're huge. And so, but they're not cheap. And I'm thinking, oh man, so if it doesn't work, that isn't good. So, but then I was doing research on trumpeters because I am interested in them and found out all these really cool, interesting things. And then I thought, I wonder if they ever attack people, like they did that goose. And I was like, right away, I find out this guy got killed by one. And I'm like, killed. And then I'm reading about how, they can break your bones. And so this swan indirectly killed this guy. So apparently they put these swans, which weren't trumpeters, they were a cousin to the trumpeter, which is one that's imported. It's the European version. And it's called the, oh my God, I can't think of it. Oh. Normally, instead of troubleshooting, I'd be reading my notes because my poor brain doesn't work anymore. They're called the mute swans. Apparently, they don't. Yeah, they don't do the trumpeting. They're quieter. So anyhow, so this apartment building in New Jersey got these mute swans to keep the geese away. And I'm like, oh yeah. So I'm reading about the mute swans, and they're even meaner than the trumpeter swans. Apparently, they'll attack everybody during breeding season. Yeah, I know this is kind of like the Jimmy Carter rabbit. The rabbit attacked him. Remember? I mean, you were too young. There was a story where Jimmy Carter got attacked by a rabbit. And the poor guy, he got teased by that forever. So could you imagine? So this guy is going out in his kayak to tend to the swans. These domesticated swans that they released to control the geese. Well, the swan attacked him in his kayak. He flips over. He tries to swim to shore, but the swan kept attacking him. Anyhow, he drowned. And now I just heard the family is suing the apartment building. Okay, think about it. His own family is suing the apartment building, yet he was the one, I think it was his idea to put him in the pond to protect. Oh my God. Anyhow, so this angry swan is being blamed for knocking a man out of his kayak it was in Chicago. Oh, I thought it was New Jersey. And then it continued to attack him until he drowned. So could you imagine that in your obituary?
Oh yeah.
Killed by a swan. Oh God. So they get to be, 28, 31 pounds. And apparently in 2010, there was a swan in England too that kept attacking rowers. And they named the swan Mr. Asbo because it had this antisocial behavior. And of course, the courts always go, no, you got to protect the swan, even though this thing's attacking everybody. Mm-hmm. And apparently they'll break your bones with their wings. I mean, they'll hit you so hard with their wings, they'll break your bones. Kind of crazy.
By the way, I'm totally sorry to interrupt, but so I was able to get Jim Myers. I sent him the link to his Facebook.
Yep.
But he might not know it's sent to his Facebook. I don't know if you can shoot him a quick text.
It just goes on and on, doesn't it, Alex?
Absolutely.
What is with you and our beginning guest?
I really dropped the ball tonight.
Yeah, that's all right. Things happen. So I'll tell Jim his link is in his Facebook.
Yep.
Correct?
Yep.
Okay.
The Jim Myers one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Do you think I can find his number to text him? Of course not. Oh, there it is. Are you a two-handed texter or one-handed? One finger, two? Yeah, I'm still one.
So Jim's got another story for us tonight.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm going to quit doing that, I think. It doesn't work. It's just, yeah. Doesn't work. Remember, we were going to have Reed on, and I said no. We're having Jim on. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I got a hold of Reed,
and
he's excited to come on. He said he could do it next week.
Anyhow, we'll
And
get you.
we're gonna do a sound check.
So okay, I'm going back to the swans now. We got everything under control,
Yes.
right? Okay,
we are under control. No more
mess ups. Okay.
Yes.
So, trumpeter swans are the largest species of waterfowl in the world. Period. I mean, they have a wingspan of 7 foot something, 7'9" even. But they fly in a V shape, when they fly south. Do you know why that is, Alex? The V shape.
Why do that?
Because, they fly in that V shape. And no, my question is, do you know why it is in a V shape?
Is that something to do with the poles?
No, it cuts the wind. But
the wind.
Right. But the second question is, one side of the V is always longer than the other side. Do you know where that is? One side of the V is always longer than.
You got me stumped. There's got to be a reason, though.
There is a reason. There's more geese on that side, or more swans. That's why the one side's always longer.
Yeah. Why do they favor that side?
There's always one side longer than the other one, and then it's a joke. And people go, you know why that is? And they go, no, I can't figure it out. Because there's more swans on that side. That's why it's longer.
I suppose, unless it's perfectly symmetrical, which probably doesn't happen much.
No, it doesn't.
No.
Anyhow, it was a bad dad joke. And that is the reason that we couldn't start our show on time. Spending too much money on those sound effects. Way too much. So is Jim, he isn't in yet.
He isn't in? Paul Wallis in the back?
So maybe Jim's not coming in.
What we could do is we could have Paul Wallis on pretty soon here, and then with Jim, if eventually at some point he gets the text, we could invite him in. He could tell a story real quick. I think it'd be nice.
All right. And also, just to let you know, if more things couldn't get worse on Untold Radio, I'm looking out and we're about to get hit by a very severe storm with hail, damaging winds, and tornadoes. So that's coming up. And I always love it because I've got an earpiece in that's directly wired to the outlet.
Well, if neither one of us get electrocuted, we'll call this night a win.
And so I brought my speakers so I could, plug in a little USB speaker so I could monitor the show without being hooked up directly into my brain. Because, you could literally witness me dying live. And you. Are you wireless? Are you wireless, Alex?
I'm wireless.
Nice. Okay, I'm not. I'm hardwired. So, anyhow, it's not good. Yeah, what time is it? Yeah, let's just bring Paul in early, and then at some point you can take a break. We'll take a little short break after maybe 10 minutes, and we'll continue with our janky show here.
Yeah, so I'm gonna promo the They from Hangar One that we've recently published, and then we'll have Paul Wallis on, and then maybe at some point Jim Myers will come on, tell a story.
Sounds good.
All right, guys. So tonight we've got a special treat. We've got Paul Wallis. He is an author of the International Bestseller, Escaping from Eden. He is a popular speaker, a researcher and author of books on spirituality and mysticism. As a senior churchman, he served as a church doctor, a trainer of pastors, and an archdeacon in the Anglican Church in Australia. Today, his work probes the world's mythologies for their insights into human origins, human potential, and our place in the cosmos. Escaping from Eden was hailed by George Noory as this generation's Chariot of the Gods. His latest book, The Scars of Eden, is endorsed by Eric von Däniken. Paul is a regular voice on the Fifth Kind TV and Gaia TV.
Okay, stop, Alex. Stop. Echoes of Eden. Where did you get Scars of Eden?
That's his latest book, The Scars of Eden.
No, it's Echoes of Eden.
No.
It's Echoes of Eden, I swear.
Okay, so I've got his old bio. So he's a prolific guy. So this must be the book before that one.
No, he's never had Scars of Eden. He might have been his maybe working title.
Oh, okay. Well, so here, we'll have him on and he can correct me. So welcome, Paul. Okay, we had to screw at least one more thing up tonight. How's it going?
G'day, Alex. I'm fine. It's
You
nice to
watching
be
our
with you.
debacle?
And Doug, I'm really enjoying the show tonight. It's so exciting. And with the storm coming, and Doug, you're wired in direct. Alex, you're wireless. We could be seeing a generational shift live on radio tonight. So that is super exciting. But don't let me forget later on, just to reassure you, Doug, I have a story of someone who got struck by lightning. And it wasn't the end. Something more interesting happened. It could turbocharge your career in an amazing way.
Yeah.
So just to clarify in books, Alex, yes, that was an old bio. Everything you said was correct, Alex, except there is a new book. So the first in my series in Paleo Contact was Escaping from Eden. The second was, as you correctly said, The Scars of Eden.
Oh, it was.
Endorsed by Eric von Däniken. And the new one, which has only been out about 10 days, Echoes of Eden, the third in the Eden series. So yes, Alex, you're correct. Prolific is the word, and there's more in the pipeline to come.
So now I have to buy you lunch, Alex.
I mean, I only got it half right, you know.
If you survive the show, Doug, yes, I think you will.
Oh my God. Do you know how things, Paul, and this is really kind of an interesting topic, but when things start going wrong on a certain day, it's like it never ends. Then yesterday I had the most beautiful day ever. It was just everything went right, beautiful day, everything was beautiful. And today it's been kind of this craziness all day long, chaotic.
Yeah. If one piece of the equation is wrong, it knocks everything out.
Yeah, it does. So I want to talk. I've got a question for you. I don't know if you've ever been asked this. I want to start it out this way. So you're writing about lost knowledge and, consciousness and, basically being aware of the world. Are we in the dark ages of that right now, or are we in the enlightened ages? Because I often wonder, I kind of vacillate back and forth.
Well, in Echoes of Eden, I show that almost in every age, in every century, there is a hiding of information and there is a recovery of information. Every generation, it seems, has to resurface this vital material, the wisdom of the ages that teaches us who we are, where we came from, how to live the best human experience we can possibly have. Every generation, there seems to have been a great forgetting, and every generation, there seems to be a great recovery. So I think the two things are going on.
So kind of at the same time, in other words, are you saying that some people are completely in the dark and others are awakening?
Well, what I find exciting about the present moment is that I am finding people are contacting me from among every demographic and every age bracket, saying something like, I no longer believe what I did 10 years ago. I want to know what's really going on, who we really are, what I'm really capable of, where we really came from, where we can take human society. And I've got an appetite for learning on me like I've never had before. And when people say that to me who are in their 80s, I do think that's unusual to have that kind of an appetite in that chapter of life. So I think there is a lot more waking up, to use that expression, and desire to explore than ever I've seen in my lifetime before.
Do you think the internet is helping people, awaken or put us to sleep? I mean, I could see it could do both. If you spend your whole day watching, goofy, cat videos, it's probably not going to add a lot.
Oh, well, yes. I mean, it's not just, I think goofy cat videos is the least of our concerns. Wash of information available to people online these days. I think it's both for sure. I think the positive side is that people who would previously have been completely isolated by an anomalous experience or by discovering something in history or in an ancient text that doesn't fit the mainstream narrative. In the past, where would you go to find out that you're not crazy? Now you can find other people who said, I've read that document as well. I've come to the same conclusion. I've had this very similar experience, and people can connect on a global level. And I think it has contributed to the kind of exploration and waking up that I was just talking about. The shadow side of it for me is obviously there's a danger of disinformation, but I think over entertainment, overstimulation is probably the bigger concern. And where that's got us to, I believe, is to a point where there can be quite significant events happen, quite significant disclosures made, and nobody takes a blind bit of notice because 24 hours later they've forgotten and are watching more crazy cat videos or whatever it is.
Have you noticed that some people, though, seem really in touch with everything, and other people I meet, it's like they're not in touch with anything. They're not in touch with the political situation, the world, any phenomena, any mysteries. They're just, I mean, it really seems extreme to me, the two extremes.
It's very disturbing and frustrating when you find yourself in conversation with someone who just seems to be inert in that kind of way. And I think there are a few reasons why that can happen to people. And one is people do get overstimulated or they feel potentially overwhelmed by information that they can see is going to lead down a rabbit hole. So from time to time, I'll be talking to someone and I'll say, well, had you noticed this, this, and this? And they'll start to talk about it. And then they'll say, oh, I don't want to think about that.
Yeah.
Because they feel they're going to get overwhelmed. And I think a lot of people are just overscheduled and overstressed, trying to survive and make ends meet. They don't have the mental energy to start asking too many questions about what's going on. Yeah. And then another reason, which I talk about in The Scars of Eden, which is a book that really does exist, I'd say that I believe that in the deep past, we were actually selected, adapted, engineered to be more amenable as a working class for the powers. And so there's something about us that naturally defers to authority. Oh, I know what's going on because the news told me. I know what's going on because the prime minister or the president told me. And there's something in us that we really have to fight against to get beyond that and not just believe everything that's told to us by an authority or fed to us by a figure on a screen.
So it's bred into us. It's in our genes. But are some of us more resilient to, to not become a sheep, basically, to not become brainwashed?
I think some of us are. I mean, some of us are very fortunate with the parents we have who might encourage more questioning kind of conversation in early years. It's certainly something I'm very proactive about with my kids. So, I mean, from time to time, my kids will come home from school and they'll say, oh, my teacher said such and such. I wasn't sure what I thought about that. And I will always say, well, what did you think? And my kids will tell me they're age 13, 11, and 7. And usually their instincts are pretty sound.
Yeah.
And so I'll say, well, I like how you're thinking there. Did you ask your teacher about that? Well, yes, I did. And I don't think the teacher was convinced by his own answer. So, I mean, I love encouraging that sort of impulse to challenge, question, think for yourself. And some parents do that proactively and others don't. So there's that. But, we're all a little bit different. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. And I think some of us just have a natural tendency to wonder about things than perhaps some others.
Well, let's get into your Echoes of Eden, your latest book, and maybe you can just kind of explain the whole series real quick, and then get into Echoes of Eden.
Sure. Well, the whole series is really in the field of paleo contact. So that's the theory that in the deep past, our ancestors had contact with other civilizations, with ET civilizations. And I surprised some people for being in this field because of my background. My background is in Christian ministry, as Alex correctly said. I was a theological educator, training pastors in the interpretation of ancient texts, a church doctor, Archdeacon for the Anglican Church in Australia. That's one down from a bishop, which is kind of a troubleshooting role. But it was in my theological education role that I started identifying the things that led me into the world of paleo contact. And what it was translation anomalies in the texts of the Bible, moments in the stories that don't quite make sense according to our mainstream understanding of Judaism and Christianity. And I was very fortunate a few years ago to have the opportunity of time to drill down into some of these questions. And some of the questions are really obvious. You know, why does God say, let us make, if there's only one God? Let us make humans to look like one of us. Well, one of who? And then you've got to square the idea of a God of love with genocide and slaughters and all sorts of violent, punitive behavior. And I found when I went to those moments, questions everybody asks who reads the Bible, that they were really issues of translation. And when I pared back the layers of interpretation on those texts that we've become used to over 2,000 years of Christian history and went to the root meanings, that's when I found there's a whole other story in the Bible hidden in plain sight. It's only a translation away from being blindingly obvious. And it is a story of paleo contact, a time when our planet was colonized by visitors from elsewhere in the cosmos who adapted our ancestors and governed over them. Now, that might seem like a shocking random story, except it isn't. It is the summary form of the Mesopotamian stories on which the biblical stories are based. So that's what got me started. And it sent me on a journey all around the world. And I found that wherever I landed on the planet, if I sat and listened to the traditional indigenous narratives of human origins, the same story emerged. Paleo contact, ancestors adapted by ancient visitors, and ancestors with higher cognitive powers, which were dialed down so we could be managed. Now, you only hear that so many times from so many cultures before you start listening to ancient mythology and ancestral narratives rather differently. And you begin to realize that these are curating ancestral cultural memory, that it isn't a book that's gone around the world and been translated differently. It isn't a story that's gone around the world in Chinese whispers. These different cultures have found different ways of expressing the same visual, auditory, kinesthetic memories, and they have curated them very carefully so that we can go back and listen to them today. And in Echoes of Eden, I go back to those sources and ask, so what? What does that mean for the kind of life you and I can live? What are we capable of doing in the light of this information? And so that's the series in thumbnail form.
Yeah, and how much did you travel, Paul? Actually, boots on the ground all over the world and meet with different people. How far did you go?
Well, this is one of the things I enjoy about the way I've written these books, because if you go to Echoes of Eden, you'll find some travels in Zambia recorded where I talk about shamanic healing and traditional modes of contact with non-human entities. And you read that and it sounds like, oh, wow, Paul's been busy over the last 12 months, because it sounds like one trip. But in actual fact, the visits I describe span about 40 years. I tell the story because you're reading it page to page. You think, oh, this is a single world trip he's somehow made under COVID lockdown. But no, maybe I shouldn't have said that word. You can blank me out. But they're actually travels that I've made over 4 decades and then have gone back to what I was told, gone back to what I saw and heard, and put the pieces together and join the dots and recognize the stories of paleo contact in every place I've visited. And it is countries all around the world.
Yeah, the fact that things are so similar all over, including with the natives here in North America. It's kind of it's very anecdotal, but it adds up to so much proof. And you are convinced of this paleo alien contact 100%. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, once I had seen the dependence of the Bible on stories of extraterrestrials, that was really the red pill moment for me. And the more correlations I found in cultural narratives all around the world, the more convinced and the more affirmed that view becomes. And it's not just that the stories repeat, but the response of governing powers to the stories is the same around the world and from age to age.
Let's talk about that response.
Well, this information always sits at the level of folklore or indigenous story. So if you go to Zambia and you want to hear stories of paleo contact, well, don't go to the local government school or listen to the 9 o'clock news.
Right.
You will need to go and talk to the traditional healers, the shamanic healers. And that is the same worldwide, that the information survives, but it never makes its way into a textbook. And from time to time, there are periodic slaughters, massacres, and even genocides to get rid of the information. So in Echoes of Eden, I talk about what happened to the Cathars in France in the 1200s, where historians estimate up to 1 million people were genocided to get rid of the information that those people carried and the evidence in their society of the power of that information. And that took the concerted efforts of 19 successive popes to wipe that out.
Wow.
That's the most violent example. Historians recognize that as the first genocide in written history.
I mean, who are these people? But can you categorize people in a general term of, are they evil people that want to bury this information? Who are these people? Who's behind it?
Well, it very often happens through the dynamics of colonization and conquest. So just for an example, the Portuguese and Spanish are beautiful people, but I'm just going to reach for an example from the history of Central and South America, when those empires went in and took that continent for the kings of Portugal and Spain. And that involved deleting and replacing the culture that was there previously. Now, to delete the culture, they had to get rid of other authorities. So you can't have two news agencies. You can't have the government saying there was no massacre in that square, and then another local news agency saying, oh, yes, there was, and this is how many people were killed. So you get rid of all the other authorities. So that means the royalty, the nobles, and the priests. And then they burned all the books they could find. Every library was incinerated because the culture that was there was a literary culture. And they had to slaughter every last priest they could find just in case any of those texts survived and there'd be someone who knew how to read them. Now, the reason they did that, because they wanted to take the continent for the king and the church. So they had to delete the old worldview and replace it with Christian orthodoxy, simply in order to maintain full spectrum dominance of their new territories. And that sort of happens whenever there's a coup or colonization, and our planet is full of moments of colonization. And it's in those moments that the indigenous memory of human origins gets pushed down to the grassroots violently, and yet somehow it always survives.
Somebody Deborah had asked, again, because it's a little confusing for people, to have you define paleo contact again for people.
Paleo contact. Paleo means in the beginning, and contact means contact. So paleo contact is the idea that in the beginning there was contact. In the deep past, our ancestors had contact experiences with extraterrestrials, and more than that, that there was an extraterrestrial presence on the planet, exploiting our ancestors, governing over them, and then in other ancient stories, actually supporting humanity and nurturing us as we got our footing on the planet, particularly after moments of cataclysm, where life on the planet was hanging in the balance. Almost every culture has a story of advanced beings arriving to help us re-establish ourselves as civilization on planet Earth. It's there in Plato as well, but it's there in indigenous narratives in Africa, South America, Greece, the Norse countries, and it's there in the Bible as well, when you do the translation work that I argue for.
Paul, do you believe these are like two or more different alien species? Like, it sounds like on the one hand we were managed slaves to some degree, and then on the other hand we were actually given a step up. We were actually helped by an alien species.
Yes.
Getting that right?
Yes, that's right. I think there have been multiple visits, multiple periods of colonization. I believe there were moments when our ancestors were helped and supported and nurtured to establish ourselves as civilization on planet Earth. That's where the Bible begins. The Bible begins on a planet that's been devastated by a catastrophe, and then Elohim, the powerful ones, turn up in a ruach, which is a craft that creates vortices of wind, and they rehabilitate the planet and they rehabilitate life on Earth. 6 chapters into Genesis, you've got some other beings turning up and hybridizing with us, and it creates a great stink, because there's a conflict of agendas for Project Humanity. So that's now at least 2. Then we've got a group who find a technological civilization on planet Earth in Genesis 11, and they don't want a spacefaring civilization here, so they bomb that civilization back into a pre-Stone Age condition. So maybe that's 3 groups, and on it goes. I think we've been visited multiple times by different groups with multiple agendas. I think there have been times when we were simply the workforce for the visitors, and there are other times when we were here being helped. And all that is in the mix of the stories our ancestors tell.
So interesting. And that's something we really don't know, how many different species from the writings, or do we have a pretty good idea?
Well, from the writings, we can identify a number, that's for sure. The Bible, for instance, talks about a sky council, and it names different demographics on the Sky Council. So that's what Hayam Eshed calls the Intergalactic Federation. This is the Chief of Space Security for Israel for 27 years, the Brigadier General who held that position. He said, on the basis of his work, his understanding derived from that work, and it was his job to know, that we are already in contact with a great variety of spacefaring civilizations who form this council. Well, that's what the Bible says. So you've got the kind of beings I've mentioned before, which seem very 3D, flesh and blood like us. But then in the Sky Council, you've got energy-based beings. And then elsewhere in the Bible, there are 3 regions of space mentioned: Orion, the Sirius star system, and the Pleiades. And those regions of space crop up in ancestral memory all around the world. And by the time you start adding it up, you realize that it's quite possible that Hayam Eshed's language is very accurate to what's going on. A vast number of spacefaring civilizations in the cosmos, a large number of which are interested in Project Earth. This is why there's the Intergalactic Federation, to try and police what's happening here. And there's some kind of an arrangement among them based on non-disclosure, which is what Hayam Eshed said. They've chosen not to self-disclose until you and I have a better understanding of space, apparently. And I think that policy of non-disclosure comes from this non-human layer of governance that our ancestors have spoken of for thousands of years.
You amaze me, Paul, at your the details that you can get into. It's just insane. I'm going to have to switch my speaker. I'm literally getting lightning strikes right out my window here. So I'm going to
Okay.
switch. So we're just going to keep, I don't think it's going to cause any problems. But I'm actually getting static
Well, we want you to survive, Doug.
in my
So
ear. Feeling it. Give me a test. Can somebody talk?
Yep.
I
Yep.
could, yeah.
Just an update. We'll Jim Myers. I did get a hold of him. I'm talking to him
Fine.
now.
Well, let's just let's wait a while here, and we'll just keep talking. I want to get it, pretty much with Paul, and Jim's obviously late, and got a storm here. So I've got my speaker working. I'm safe. Paul, you're not going to see me fry.
That's very good. That's very reassuring.
Yeah. Hopefully, we're not getting an echo from my little speaker setup. I've never tried to do this.
You sound fine. So, Paul, I can you repeat that? So it sounds like you're saying there is a concerted effort to be covert now, whereas before in the past it seemed the alien presence was very overt, and it was
Yes.
if not misunderstood by ancient civilization, it was at least common knowledge that there were these beings. They might
Yes, that's right. If you listen to ancient Egyptian story and to Sumerian story and the ancient Hebrew stories, Mesoamerican stories, they all speak of a time, or I suppose you could say the same of the Greek, the Norse, the Vedic traditions, the Edo narrative as well from out of Nigeria. They all say there was a time when our ET visitors were on the planet's surface, governing us very visibly, that we venerated them as gods because they were clearly advanced species. I mean, if a species turns up in a craft and starts terraforming your planet around you and clearing the sky so you can see the sun, moon, and stars for the first time, which is the Genesis story, of course you're going to say, well, these are our superiors, these are our gods. So what was your question again, Alex?
Yeah, so obviously it seemed like at some point, like,
yes, they were visible. They were visible. They were on the planet's surface. That's exactly right. And then all those stories reach a point where there's a pivot in the journey and the visitors leave or cease to be visible, and they leave behind their monarchies, their priesthoods, and we roll along as before, except they're not visible. And
can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, because so they left. Do you have any ideas of why they left originally?
Well, I can theorize. I can theorize that we may have been colonized by visitors from other planets for reasons similar to those with which we invade each other's countries. Mm-hmm. So let's take the idea that we were used as a workforce for people interested in gold. Now, this is a story that's been popularized out there, and there's some footing for that, I believe, because there is evidence for ancient gold mining in southern Africa in the period about 200,000 years ago. Now, science tells us that our ancestors were here at that time, looking very much like us, built like us, not quite as smart as us. Smart enough to work in someone else's mine, not smart enough to know how to build a farm or build a city. So, I mean, that episode is there. I think it's possible that people came for minerals, things the planet had to offer, and occupied the planet for a while. And then when they got what they wanted, they left. I mean, it's a little bit like if you think about how Britain went into Ghana from 1874 to 1950. You go in and you've got to be very visible, and clearly you've got to have advanced armaments so that the country will just give up in an instant and not even bother fighting you. And then you appoint the prime minister, you appoint the police force, you are the army, everyone else is an insurgent. You set up the education department, the legal system, the banks, so on and so forth, and you, by force, at the end of a gun, you run that country. But once you have set the commodity prices and the exchange rates, set up the banking system, related it to your own banking system, you don't have to stay in that country anymore. You can go home and you'll still enjoy all the benefits of sitting at the top of the economic tree. So I think it's very possible Earth has been colonized that way in the past as well, where there's a very visible, the end of a rifle kind of presence, and then no longer, then they go. And even those who talk about the more benevolent contact in the deep past will say these beautiful people sat with us for a while, and then they returned to their home, a planet in the Pleiades. And what's interesting to me is that you read these narratives I mentioned before around the world, and there is this change moving from a time when we are being governed by beings that are visible and who are calling all the shots, so to speak. And then they leave behind the monarchies and the priesthoods. And in the Bible, you suddenly realize that the kings who have been appointed are now trying to employ prophets and priests to establish remote communication with the gods because they're no longer contactable on the planet's surface. And there are a few stories of that in the Hebrew canon where they're trying to remember how to use old technology, the Urim and the Thummim, to contact the gods, or they're using altered states of consciousness in the temple in order to access information interdimensionally from the old gods who are no longer present. And that pattern of story repeats around the world. So I think that's how it was. There have been times when our visitors have been very visible, dominating things, and then where their presence has been more subtle or remote, or they've just moved on altogether.
What are your personal thoughts, Paul, about that happening all over again? Have you, basically the future of Eden?
Well, I think my view is that there is still a non-human layer to the governance of the planet.
Okay.
But that hasn't changed.
Okay.
That the Intergalactic Federation, to use Hammershed's language, does have strings to pull in Project Humanity. There was a book written...
Do we know they're here? Are they in the shadows completely?
It depends who the we is. I think the short answer is yes, we know they're here. As Hammershed said, it's covert government that's in contact. This was the same assertion made by Paul Hellyer, of course, the former Minister of Defense for Canada. It's the same assertion that was made by Ed Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon, if you believe we went to the moon, which I happen to. All saying the same thing, that at a covert government level, there is contact. And so some of the disclosure activity that we look at from time to time is almost a distraction if you believe, as I do, that contact is already there and has been unbroken for a long, long time. It was being written about in the 1600s by Robert Kirk, Presbyterian minister in Scotland. And anyone who knows much about Christian cultural history will think, what? Presbyterian minister? Because that's very conservative, very reformed, very evangelical, but on the basis of simply listening to the people of Aberfoyle, his parish, he became convinced that there is a non-human layer to the governance of the planet, which he called the secret commonwealth. And I believe it's still the case today.
So to kind of ask a question, but to really dumb it down, do you think it was a number of alien races that helped construct the Bible? Or do you think it was one alien race that had a big influence on it?
Well, there are a lot of different entities that are referenced in the stories of the Bible. So you go back to the stories of beginnings in Genesis 1 to 11, and there we really are talking about the sky people or the Anunnaki of the Mesopotamian stories. And then you get further in and you realize that, doing the translation that I argue for, that different colonies of humans are governed over by different Elohim or powerful beings. And one of those is the figure known as Yahweh. And so the Yahweh narratives dominate the Hebrew stories for a long, long time. That is the God of that particular people group. But the clues are there that he's in competition with others very much like him. And in some of those texts, and this is where it does get confusing, there was, and that's because there was an edit, a final redaction of the Hebrew scriptures in the 6th century BCE, where all the books of the Bible were reworked to form a single story to make it look like a seamless story of God. And they airbrushed the holy name Yahweh over a lot of earlier stories. So stories that were Anunnaki stories become Yahweh stories.
Okay.
Stories that were archonic beings, they become Yahweh stories. And stories that were dragon stories become Yahweh stories. And I wonder if, in fact, the dragon stories are the original Yahweh stories of the Bible.
Interesting. So, trying to think where we should go, because there's so many topics we can cover with you. So let's talk about human potential. Can you kind of do a laundry list of what you believe those potentials are, or things that we used to be able to do that we cannot anymore because of whatever the reasons?
Sure. Well, when you start listening to the stories of beginnings that have been curated by ancestral narratives, you realize that stories of paleo contact and human potential are completely interwoven. So you have those stories of nurture at the beginning, where we are being upgraded for higher intelligence. That's actually what happens in Genesis 3.
Well, okay, when you say upgraded, you mean genetically?
I mean genetically modified to be cleverer.
The more intelligent, higher IQ, this sort of stuff. Modifications at the DNA level.
That's right. Exactly. Well, in Genesis 3, just to use that as an example, because there are versions of this in every culture. In Genesis 3, at the beginning of the chapter, the humans are so unintelligent, they don't even know they're naked. So that's kind of an animal type intelligence.
Absolutely.
And then by the end of the chapter, the great controversy is that we've become almost as intelligent as the gods, the Elohim. So that's a massive upgrade. And there's an argument as to whether that upgrade should be made. The hint is that prior to the upgrade, we were an engineered species and we were not fertile, that we were simply being generated as workers. And the hints are there in the Bible and in the Sumerian stories. And the person identified as responsible for Project Earth in the Sumerian stories was Enki. And he gets into a conflict with the regional chief. They're part of the same ET demographic. Enki wants to upgrade the humans because he says they're miserable. Every other species needs a male and female. We need that. Every other species is fertile. They need that. I want them to have a better human experience. I want to upgrade them. And Enlil, his younger brother, who has this region of space to supervise, says, no, we don't want the humans any smarter than they are. Enki breaks ranks, makes the change. Now, the Bible records that same story, but the Bible calls Enki the serpent, and the Bible calls Enlil Yahweh. But originally, it's not a Yahweh story at all. It's a Sumerian story of an upgrade. So it's an upgrade of intelligence. You go to the Popol Vuh, and it has a similar moment where the engineers, they're called, the advanced beings who've come from elsewhere in the cosmos, are anxious about how intelligent the humans should be. And the Popol Vuh is lovely because it's very open about how much difficulty they had getting it right. And so there's a very long sequence of experimentation way back before Homo sapiens. And the experimentation resulted in sort of dead ends. It resulted in what the book says are ape-like creatures who live in the forests. And it resulted in us. So that's rather intriguing because it's saying that the apes and us have a common ancestor. Well, that's what modern science tells us. The Mayans were saying this thousands of years ago. But then they got to us and they thought, no, we've got to do something different this time. We've been tweaking and tweaking, breeding, whatever it is we've been doing, genetically splicing. We need to make a leap to get these species clever enough to serve us, but still wanting to serve us, because they'd produced clever creatures before, but they had no interest in serving superiors. And so the last thing they do is to splice a bit more of their own DNA into the mix and they come up with Homo sapiens, sapiens, sapiens. So that's us plus higher cognitive abilities that they found very difficult to manage. And they hint at what these abilities are. It says that the vision of the humans was not limited in the beginning. So think about that. How is our vision limited? Our vision is limited by surfaces. We can't see into things, we can't see behind things. It's limited by time. We can only see the present, we can't see the past, we can't see the future. It's limited by frequency. We can only see this spectrum of radio waves. We can't see this. A dog might see this, a cat might see this, we can't see it. It's limited by distance. We can't see over the horizon, we can't see into deep space. What would it mean for our vision not to be limited? Well, as soon as you take those limits off, you're seeing into things, you've got X-ray vision. You're seeing into deep space, you've got remote viewing. You're seeing different times, you've got past viewing, future viewing, precognition. And so the hint is there, the humans could do that, and that's too clever. How do you manipulate and herd a species that knows what you're thinking? And so they had an emergency meeting to work out how to dumb the humans down. And the Popol Vuh, the Mayan story says, they produced a vapor that when sprayed over human populations, brain damages people to the point they can no longer access these higher cognitive powers, where their perceptual field is just this immediately around us. Our 5 physical senses tell us what's what. And for any other information, we have to rely on an authority to tell us what's what. And they found they could work with that. And you go to other parts of the world, they'll have an equivalent story of the humans being dialed down. But here is the punchline: not by changing our DNA, not by making us inherently less intelligent, but by putting things into the environment, devices into the environment to lower our level of consciousness.
Poisons like fluoride, that we're
Well,
in a mass, in a mass way by putting it in our drinking water.
that's the take home, isn't it? That if you want to be maximally healthy and to access your higher powers, pay attention to what's in your environment and get your environment as clean as it can be.
Do you think that's being purposely done to this day to keep us dumbed down, as you said?
Well, as we said before, I mean, in the Popol Vuh, the engineers did it with a vapor. In the Nigerian story, they released devices to make people sick and mentally unwell and anxious. And I suppose at the time of the Roman Empire, they did it through over-entertaining everybody. And I think there's some version of that in every age, either to keep us distracted or not to worry too much if our food's just that little bit toxic.
Paul, are they behind TikTok?
Well, somebody suggested to me the other day that TikTok is a deliberate attempt to lower our attention span, so that even if there's powerful information out there, we don't have the attention span to get to a therefore and see the implications.
Right.
I don't know if that's the intention of TikTok. Personally, I think it can be a lot of fun, but I do think we need to be proactive about maintaining our ability to think in paragraphs. Right. So I would say that.
Yeah, and it may be an unintended consequence, but the fact that people's attention span is going down. Alex was giving me stats the other day, and in some cases it's 3 seconds where we lose interest.
It's pretty shocking, because that is going to impact people's ability to maintain any kind of healthy relationship.
Gosh. Yeah,
and learn new things and expand their mind and a lot of other stuff. I as a quick aside, Doug, I don't know if you got the private message I sent, but Jim Myers is in
Yep, I'm aware. Yep.
The studio. Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure you knew that. We might, if possible, we'll have a quick break at some point.
So we were going to have a guy on, Paul, at the beginning, our first half hour, and then bring you on. But we lost 15 minutes because of the technical problems. And so everything's all whatever. So we'll bring Jim in. So you had talked about the shamanic modes of healing in North America, and how they're connected basically with ET contact. Can you explain that? Because shamanic healing, I mean, we're all familiar with some of the stories, but and I think people are getting more and more familiar with it because there's more and more podcasts that are covering shamanic, ways and healing and ways that they can raise your consciousness. But can you kind of talk about that? How do we know that there's ET
Sure.
connection with shamanic and shamans?
Sure. Well, the shamanic practice will be part of a bigger cultural practice, and the stories curated by that culture will very often, when you're at the indigenous layer of things, have stories of human origins that talk about ET contact, as we were talking about earlier, talk about our ancestors having higher cognitive powers, as we just were. And the shamanic role is to know how to reactivate those higher cognitive powers. And that involves contact modalities. Now, whether it's ET contact or contact with other kinds of entity that are interdimensional entities or transdimensional entities or energy-based entities, well, that's an interesting question. But I'll just start by saying how the contact works. If you go to see a shamanic healer in Zambia, a Nanga, or a Sangoma in South Africa, because you've got some sickness, the shamanic healer will perceive you entering the room surrounded by an invisible support team. And the shaman's role is to tune into the conversation between your invisible support team and their invisible support team, because they're now going to have a conversation about you and how to progress your journey through life and your health. And the shaman will have different modalities they use to tune into that conversation. It may be an altered state of consciousness. They may cast jish and then read how the jish fall. They may light a fire and then see how the fire is influenced by external factors. And very often there's a prelude to this that is about acknowledging the presence of these other entities. And then they will proceed, listen into the information, and then act on that. It might be something they'll do in the moment, or it might be advice they will give you about how to manage your condition moving into the future. Now, what's interesting about that approach, seeing healing as a contact modality, is that repeats globally. It's not just West Africa or Southern Africa where you can find it. You go to Mesoamerica, you'll find the same thing. You come to Australia, you'll find the same thing. How did different cultures, different ages of history come up with the same concept and decide that was the way to go about healing? Well, as I researched that, I realized I had experienced something very, very similar myself. I'd just been using different labels for decades. Because I was in Christian ministry, I was often approached by people who wanted prayer for healing. And I'll give an example. In my very first job in London, a lady came for healing because she was absolutely crippled up in her back, had terrible mobility problems. And after 5 speaking with her, my senior pastor, Pastor Irwin, I call him in the book, he's in Echoes of Eden, he said, "B, tell us about your dad." And as she started talking about her dad, she became even more scrunched up and immobile. And it was easy to see why she carried a heap of resentment against her dad. It wasn't a story of abuse as such, but his issues had made her childhood incredibly painful. And you can see why she was full of fury towards him. And my pastor said, "Do you think you're ready to let go of all the resentment that you rightly feel towards your father, because it's not doing you any good, it's actually hurting you? Do you think you can let go of that and say, I'm leaving that in the past? It's not about, reconciliation necessarily, because I might still not want to have a relationship with you, but I'm just not going to invest any more of my energy into all the bad stuff that happened in the past. I'm going to live my life now. Do you feel ready to do that?" And she said, "Yes, I do. And she verbalized that as if he was sitting there. And then as she was doing it, I could see she was breathing more deeply. She was sitting more straight. And then she just was very quiet for a couple of moments. She bent down to pick up her crutches. And I said, "Oh, B, we haven't prayed for your back yet." And she said, "Oh, my goodness, I'm completely healed." So it was an amazing experience for me because she was suffering from trapped emotion that had damaged her body, and it was now released. So that was a phenomenon all itself. But afterwards, I said to Pastor Irwin, "What made you think to ask that question? B, tell us about your dad." And he said, "I don't know really. I just threw up a question. How do we help this lady?" And the thought came into my mind. Ask her about her dad. Now, at the time, I had labels for that. We were the Christian ministry team. That was a word of knowledge from the Spirit of God to aid with the lady's healing. That was my language. But if I told that story to a Sangoma in Zambia or a Nanga in Zambia, Sangoma in South Africa, they would listen to that story of Pastor Irwin getting that thought, and they'd say, the ancestors helped you. And so some of the contact in their belief is with ancestral spirits, which is also in the New Testament, and some is with spirits that they're not quite sure who they are, whether they are ETs who are flesh and blood, but they communicate telepathically, whether they're energy-based beings, whether they are a higher self, aspects of cosmic consciousness. They're a little bit agnostic about who these entities are. They just know that they can tap this information, and it's not that they do everything the voices tell them. They weigh it up for themselves, and then they act in the light of it. And that paradigm is global. You won't find it in the official departments of health, but you will find it in the indigenous shamanic layer in every country.
Crazy. Just so you know, Alex and Paul, we're about to be hit with 80-mile-an-hour winds. They're calling this storm extremely destructive.
Oh,
and
crumbs.
It's heading too, Alex, just so you know. So we'll stay on. I mean, if we can, I'll stay on, but it doesn't sound good. It sounds like roofs are blowing off everywhere.
Oh, terrible.
Yeah, it's just the weather has been certainly extreme. Like, here at home, we've had 30-degree temperatures, and then today it's getting up into the 90s. And tomorrow we're going to have the same kind of weather. And then it'll be back down into the 40s again and 30s. It's just bizarre weather. That's
strange.
Yeah, it is.
Strange everywhere, I think.
So if we do lose you, we will finish on another day. It's all we're going to, there's nothing else we can do.
Okay.
Let's talk about dragons, because obviously you've done research, you have a lot of knowledge, and most people kind of always have this little bit of feeling that they were real. Okay. That all these stories didn't come from nowhere. So let's talk.
Yes.
Dragons. What do you know, Paul?
Well, that's a good place to start. All these stories didn't come from nowhere. Why is it that every culture seems to have a dragon story? And it's not just a story of, there once was this amazing beast. It is a story of a time when ancestors were governed over by non-human entities that were terrifying, and that continued until human society became mature enough that we were able to say, look, if we all act in solidarity, we can say no to this pattern of governance. If we all say no, we're not going to take your orders anymore, what's the dragon going to do? Can't kill us all. Might kill some of us, but there's no point in killing us all and have no one to serve it. And the stories repeat around the world that once the people came together and said, we're not working for you anymore, that's the end of the dragon's reign. Now, that happens in the Bible as well, where the people are governed by the character called Yahweh, and then they reach the point of saying, no more, we want human governance for human society. And so they get King Saul, the first human king. But the correlations of the stories go beyond that pattern, which is about social development, really, at the very least, and I think it's about paleo contact as well. The names of these entities repeat around the world. So in the Popol Vuh, in the Mayan stories, You've got and the Aztec stories, the Toltec stories. You've got Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, Cucumatz. In Greece, you've got the Kur. In Spain and Portugal, you've got the Coca. In Georgia, you've got the Colchis. You've got
Hey, I have to interrupt. We have a tornado on the ground, like right here. So, Alex, I would imagine you're into the same morning. We could probably end the broadcast. And just reconnoiter the Paul.
Yep. Yeah, I got
Paul,
the same.
I think we lost Paul. Paul,
Okay.
you there?
No,
I'm still here.
Finish the show. It's just really bad timing. But yep, they're saying there's a tornado real near, super
All
near
right.
me. So I'm going to go.
Well, you get safe, and we'll talk another time.
Head into the basement. Thanks. Sorry,
Yep.
Paul. Alex,
That's
you
all right.
do the same.
Yep.
All right. Bye.
All right, I'm gonna end
All
the
right.
broadcast. Okay, it was nice having you on. We'll definitely
Yeah.
finish this
All right.
later.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe, guys.
Yep. Bye.